Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. We begin with President Trump doubling down on his claims about the destructive impact of U.S. airstrikes on Iran and downplaying a preliminary U.S. intelligence assessment that appears to contradict those claims. At a news conference today at The Hague, the president again insisted that the strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, quote, totally obliterated the country's nuclear program. Listen.
As you know, the devastating U.S. strike on Fordo destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility totally inoperable. It was devastated. We assessed that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for many years to come.
The president's comments come despite a preliminary intelligence assessment, which was leaked to the press, that suggests the strikes may have only set back Iran's nuclear capabilities by a few months. My colleague Kelly O'Donnell pressed the president on that assessment.
What is your message then, sir, to the intelligence community when they present reports? You're not disputing the DIA report. You're just...
They presented a report that wasn't finished. We're talking about something that took place 3 days ago.
I understand.
The report was done 2 days ago. Wait a minute.
Yes.
They didn't see it. All they can do is take a guess. Now, if you take a look at the pictures, if you take a look how it's all blackened, you know the fire and brimstone is all underground because it's granite and it's all underground. You don't show it.
Understood. Do you have a message for the intelligence community, though, in terms of unvarnished information getting to you, that it's not...
I don't really have a message. I would say issue the report when you know what happened. I wouldn't say that it could be severe or maybe not. They use the word severe. It could be severe or maybe it's not. So people like you picked up and said, oh, it's not severe. No, the report was not a complete report. Yeah, the message was probably wait till you know the answer before you do.
This afternoon, National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard posted on social media, quote, new intelligence confirms what the president has stated numerous times. Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed. If the Iranians chose to rebuild, they would have to rebuild all 3 facilities entirely, which would likely take years to do. Now, it's unclear what new intelligence she's referencing, also bolstering the president's claims today. An Israeli military spokesperson saying that the U.S. and Israeli airstrikes set Iran's nuclear program back, quote, many years. And Israel's Atomic Energy Commission assessing that the U.S. strikes on Iran's Fordo plant, quote, destroyed its critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. Additionally, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs today acknowledged that the country's nuclear facilities had been badly damaged. And in a sign the Trump administration is looking to move forward, the president says U.S. and Iranian officials will meet next week. NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins me now from the Netherlands. Also with me is NBC News Senior National Security Correspondent Courtney Kube. Thanks to both of you for being here. Kelly, incredible job at the press conference today. Really an extraordinary exchange. The president saying that the U.S. intelligence assessment is too preliminary. Talk about the argument he is trying to make and where this goes from here.
Well, certainly we have heard from the president from the earliest minutes after this strike was made public that he has certainly lifted up the military who carried out the operation, the various pilots and all of the coordinating elements as being successful. But there is also a question about what is the ultimate consequence of a successful military operation. And from the earliest moments, he's been making a political argument that this was a devastating attack on the Iranian nuclear program. And then this defense intelligence agency report, which they acknowledge was an initial early report, preliminary, you could say, had raised the question about the scope of the impact of the strikes, saying 3 to 6 months of time setting back the program. The president is certainly arguing that it is a much more devastating impact and that it effectively will take out the Iranian nuclear program for a period of years, permanently, even as far as he has gone. And so we've seen the president making a very strong political argument, bringing in his Secretary of Defense and his Secretary of State to bolster that, citing foreign intelligence from Israel and Iran to sort of support his claims, while at the same time expressing frustration at the media, certainly, but also at the authors of the Defense Intelligence report that made that assessment that does not live up to what the president wants the messaging to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have to see how this continues to play out. Kelly, he made another really striking statement, which is that he said there would be meetings between U.S. and Iranian officials as soon as next week. What can you tell us about those meetings? What are your sources telling you?
Well, that was an announcement that he made, and he said perhaps there would be something to sign. He said that he talked with Secretary of State Rubio about having some sort of document that would codify in writing the results of this, that they would not be pursuing a nuclear weapons program. The president is insistent that Iran no longer wants to do that, even though for many years they have been pursuing that. So that's part of what he talked about. He also talked about on-the-ground assessments that he is expecting to learn more about that. That's notable because that would mean intelligence assets or military assets on the ground to inspect damage, in addition to any of the other kinds of tools that can be used through satellite imaging and so forth. So the next steps with Iran, that is a big question. And the president describes that country as being weary from the war with Israel and with the strikes levied by the United States. And so more to come on what that meeting would look like and which officials could be involved.
And one more headline, Kelly, I have to ask you about, which is President Trump met with President Zelensky. Of course, we've been tracking the war in Ukraine, his attempts to wind that down as well. What were the key takeaways from that meeting?
Well, the fact that the meeting happened was notable because there was no opportunity for the press to see the two leaders together. That stands out. Obviously, they can have private meetings, but typically at a NATO summit, especially when President Zelensky of Ukraine is such a central figure in the discussions at NATO, that there is no visual, no photo, no opportunity for the press to show the two leaders together. I asked the president if that was a tactical move, given the fact he's trying to bring Vladimir Putin along on a ceasefire. He didn't actually respond to that part of it. There were so many questions being asked. But what is striking about this is there was some discussion about how to try to bring about a ceasefire, and also some discussion of weapons that Ukraine would like from the United States. A real question still about how much the United States, separate from Europe's contributions, would continue to back Ukraine with munitions and support. Yep. Certainly an important meeting for Ukraine.
Undoubtedly, the president signaling he may be open to sending Patriot missiles, which would be a significant shift. Kelly O'Donnell covering a number of headlines after an incredibly long day and tremendous effort at that press conference. Thank you so much. Courtney Kube, let me head over to you. Let's start with what we heard from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. She referenced this new intelligence assessment. What are you learning about what she may have been referencing?
So, and remember, the president at that press conference with Kelly earlier also said that more intelligence has come in. You know, from the beginning, when we first learned about this Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, it's been very clear that this is a preliminary assessment. It's an early on look at what they knew so far, the intelligence community knows so far about what happened, and it's also very clear that they will continue to get more information in, not just in the form of the satellite imagery that we know they've been collecting since Sunday, but in other methods as well. Remember, there's various kinds of intelligence, including human intelligence, signals intelligence. The president today, surprising a lot of people, myself included, frankly, acknowledged that there are people on the ground who have had some sort of access to these sites that have provided more information about exactly what happened underneath there. But remember, Kristen, it's not just U.S. intelligence that the administration is now citing. They're also talking about information that's coming from allied intelligence, like the Israelis. They've put out information or a statement saying that they believe the facilities were destroyed. And then the president even today referencing Iranians, the official Iranian statement about it, saying that there had been some destruction at these facilities. So at this point, it's not really clear, but information is definitely continuing, and intelligence are definitely continuing to come into the community here.
And just put into context, Courtney, if you would, for our viewers, the idea that the first assessment is preliminary, it was assessed with low confidence. What exactly does that mean? And typically, would an administration take into account the intelligence from other countries as well?
Yes, depending on the country. So especially if it's one of the Five Eyes, one of the closest intel sharing countries that the United States has. But remember, most intelligence that we hear about, when we get any kind of information or assessments, generally people tell us that it is a low confidence. That's pretty common. So that doesn't surprise me at all. A battle damage assessment like the one that we would be seeing for Iran can take days or weeks. And Iran is one of the most difficult places that they would have to figure out exactly what would be happening here, because the U.S. doesn't have anyone on the ground that we're aware of. There could be partners or allies who would have people, like the president was presumably referencing today. But it's not just that. So they're going to rely, because it's not a friendly place for the U.S. to be flying aircraft over. They rely on satellite imagery. They will rely on things like signals intercepts or, listening to what's happening there. But because they can't, get in themselves and look at it, that's only going to make it more difficult. And then, Kristen, that's compounded by the fact that the sites are buried deep underground. So they're relying on imagery from overhead that doesn't show what happened underneath there. It's an extremely difficult intelligence picture for them to put together. The notion that they would have a fulsome look at it within 24 hours or even 48 hours, officials are telling us that that's just not the case. They expect to get a fuller picture to it over days and potentially even weeks.
Courtney Kube, thank you so much for putting it all into context for us, helping us understand this incredibly complicated storyline. We really appreciate it. I am joined now by David Albright, president of the Institute for Science and International Security. He's also a former nuclear weapons inspector. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
Well, we really are glad to have you and your insights. I want to read a little bit of what your organization has assessed so far. You write, overall, Israel's and U.S. attacks have effectively destroyed Iran's centrifuge enrichment program. It will be a long time before Iran comes anywhere near the capability it had before the attack. Help us understand, what does long time mean? What are you, years?
Yeah,
decades?
essentially years. And what it is what you can assess with overhead imagery now is the buildings on the surface, and we know what they do. And so the facilities to make gas centrifuges, destroyed. The facility, a big facility to make the kind of the input material to a gas centrifuge called uranium hexafluoride, completely destroyed. It took Iran years to build those facilities. And so the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, who you quoted earlier, talks about the destruction of the infrastructure to make centrifuges. And that's some of the things they're talking about. What is at debate here is what's happened in one facility, in particular at Fordow, which has about 2,700 centrifuges. And another facility, Natanz, which isn't that deeply buried, we're pretty convinced that many of the centrifuges were destroyed through both Israeli earth penetrators and the U.S. MOP that hit it a couple days ago. And that had 15,000 centrifuges. And so you have a situation where there's very little left in the program, and that's really what we're fighting over, in a sense. And it's important to fight over it because they could use that residual capability to set up a secret site to make weapon-grade uranium for nuclear weapons.
So why do you think there's this discrepancy where you have these initial intelligence reports saying, oh, no, it's only been set back by a few months? And by the way, is key to getting to the root of this people on the ground, human sources on the ground, to actually be able to see what the damage looks like with their own eyes?
Yeah, it's certainly intelligence is going to have to answer this. And I was a little bit surprised that President Trump would talk about people on site, because I doubt if they were military forces of Israel. I mean, I would imagine they're more likely to be part of Mossad, posing as workers or something. But yes, you do need people. But the bottom line is that it's in public. We don't really know what this DIA assessment's about. It doesn't. From a technical point of view, saying the program's only set back by a few months doesn't make any sense when they've destroyed the ability to make any centrifuges, produce any feed gas for the centrifuge, which means they can't operate past once they use up their supply. So what I'm trying to figure out is maybe they mean something like the amount of time it would take for some X number of residual centrifuges to operate, or the amount of time it would take to use a small group of centrifuges to make weapon-grade uranium in secret. But on the face of it, the statement makes no sense.
You know, one of the big discussions right now, in addition to how much damage did these nuclear facilities suffer, is Has the uranium been moved? I want to play a little bit of what we heard from President Trump and get your reaction on the other side.
We think we hit them so hard and so fast they didn't get to move. And if you knew about that material, it's very hard and very dangerous to move.
What do you make of that assessment by the president? Could they have moved their enriched uranium before the attack?
Well, they actually announced to the International Atomic Energy that they were planning to do it. We don't know if they did it or not. Some of the tanks are very heavy. If you're talking about, let's say, 5% enriched, they're very heavy. If you're talking about 60%, they're not very heavy, and they can easily be moved and moved safely. And they're actually in containers designed to withstand accidents during transportation. So it can be moved, and it's a real issue. Part of what we're hearing from Israel and others is that there's more in the rubble than people understand. But again, it's unconfirmed, and from a planning point of view, you have to assume they still have stocks.
So finally, President Trump made this striking statement, I thought, in which he basically said he doesn't think Iran has any interest in continuing its nuclear program. And yet our Andrea Mitchell was able to speak with Iran's foreign minister last week. I'm going to read you a little bit of what he said. He said, suppose they destroy one facility or two, we can rebuild them because the knowledge is there. The technology is there. We have achieved that ourselves, and the technology cannot be reversed, cannot be destroyed by bombs. That, to me, doesn't sound like a country that is on the cusp of abandoning its nuclear program. How do you read it?
No, I don't think it is yet. I mean, I think they're almost defeated, but we're not quite there. And Trump will have to, President Trump needs to negotiate cleverly to get his goal of no enrichment in Iran. And in that would be to get these stocks of 60% and these centrifuges that have gone, in a sense, missing. So it's going to be difficult. But I will say, if these countries walk away and don't, Israel and the United States, without a deal, then they are setting up a situation where 6 months, a year from now, we may be having to deal with a country that's making a little bit of a dash to nuclear weapons. I don't think it can do it now. You can get rid of technology by killing the people. And they've killed up to 14 people associated with the nuclear weapons program, but those people can be replaced eventually.
All right. Well, extraordinary amount of information you just provided. We really appreciate it, David Albright. Thank you very much for being here.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.